Yo! Lifelong Learner Blueroot here with episode 10 of the Azure AZ-104 exam prep series, Manage Azure Storage. Thanks for tuning in. In this episode, we will be evaluating the use for Azure Storage for storing files. We're going to minimize the cost of storage by placing less access files in lower price storage tiers. Additionally, we will be exploring different protection mechanisms that Azure Storage offers, as well as messing around with the Azure File Service. With that said, the objectives that we were going to accomplish in this video are to provision the lab environment, of course, create and configure Azure storage accounts, manage Blob storage, manage authentication and authorization for storage, create and configure an Azure file share, and manage network access for Azure storage. So let's get right into it. Let's start off by provisioning our lab environment. We'll do what we have been doing in the past episodes and deploy a new resource group followed by a virtual machine deployment using Azure templates. So let's open up the Cloud Shell. I'll be using PowerShell. I'm going to create new variables for location. Actually, let's go central. And another variable for a resource group name. Let's now run that PowerShell command that we're all familiar with to create a new resource group. Perfect. Off screen, I uploaded my template.json file and my parameters.json file that I will be using to deploy my virtual machine using templates and the resource group deployment command. I'll have the files in the description below in case you're following along. With that said, let's run this familiar PowerShell command, new AZ resource group deployment, with the first parameter being the resource group name, the second parameter being the template file name, and then of course the last parameter being the parameter file. And let's run this as a job. Perfect. Now with that running in the background, let's go ahead and create and configure our Azure storage account. So let's search for storage. Yikes. Storage accounts. Let's create a new one. I'm going to go click my newly created resource group. Let's name it something simple. I'm going to leave these settings as is. Let's go to the networking tab. We're going to leave the connectivity method as public endpoint, and we're going to leave the network routing as Microsoft Network Routing, both defaults. Hop over to the data protection tab. We're going to accept the defaults here as well. Under the advanced tab, we're not going to change anything here either. So let's just go ahead and review and create. This should only take a minute or two. Now that the storage account has been deployed, let's go check it out. Everything's looking good. If you wanted to change any of the initial configurations when setting up the storage account, you could always go here under configuration and then just simply change them here. With that said, let's mess around with one setting. Again, under settings, let's go to geo replication and notice the secondary location here. Under storage endpoints, if you click view all, these are all the storage account endpoints. So let's go back to the configuration, and in the replication drop-down list here, let's select geo redundant, and then let's save that setting. Now if we go back to geo replication, view all storage endpoints again, now notice that the storage account endpoints only contains primary endpoints. Let's go back to the configuration settings. Under replication, swap it back to locally redundant storage. Save this. Now switching back to the geo replication settings. Now you should notice that we only have the primary location. If we go back to the configuration setting, We can now change the blob access tier to cool. Go ahead and save that. Changing your blob access tier to cool instead of hot is often used to save a lot of money when it comes to Azure storage. Next, we're going to create a blob container and upload a blob into it. Azure Blob Storage is a service for storing large amounts of unstructured object data, such as text or binary data. You can use blob storage to expose data publicly to the world, or to store application data privately. Common uses of blob storage include serving images or documents directly to a browser. In our case, right now, we're just going to create a blob container and upload one blob with a text file to it. So let's go back over to our storage account resource. Under the blob service section, let's click containers and let's add a new container. Let's give it a simple name. Oops. And let's keep our container private. Let's hop over to our container and let's upload a file. I'm just going to upload a random MIT license, and I'm also going to change some of the advanced settings. I'm going to keep the blob type under block blob. I'm going to leave the authentication type as account key. I'm going to leave this setting. I'm going to make sure it's 4 megabytes. I'm going to change this over to hot because I'm going to be accessing this often. And upload to folder, licenses. Just creating this ad hoc. And let's go ahead and upload. Since this blob container is hot, it's optimized for storing data that is accessed frequently. The hot access tier often has higher storage costs than cool and archive tiers, but the lowest access cost, considering that its data is expected to be read from and written to frequently. Let's now configure authentication and authorization for our blob. Let's go ahead and click our blob container folder. Let's click the license document and let's copy the URL. Let's go ahead and open a private window and paste in that URL. Yep. Now this is expected since the container that we created has the public access level set to private, which does not allow any anonymous access. Let's close this private window and let's move over to this Generate SAS tab right here. An SAS, or a Shared Access Signature, is a URI that grants restricted access rights to Azure storage resources. So in our case, our license blob over here. So we're just going to scroll down, leave these settings the same, and generate our SAS token and URL. So let's go ahead and copy this new SAS URL, open up a new private window, paste that in, and as expected, we're able to download our license file. Since now our access is authorized based on the newly generated SAS token, this is expected, we do have the appropriate access. We could save this blob SAS URL later, and we could utilize it as we please. Finally, we're going to create and configure Azure file shares. Before we do so, we need to confirm that the virtual machine we created in the beginning of this episode was successfully deployed and is running. So let's hop over to resource groups. Click the resource group we made earlier this episode. Perfect. We can confirm that the virtual machine and all of its dependencies are built and the machine is running. Let's traverse back to the storage account we created. And in the file service section, let's click file shares. Let's add a file share and simply give it a name. quota we're going to put as 1024 gigs and leave the tier as transaction optimized. And go ahead and grade it. Now click on the new file share you just created and go ahead and click connect. Notice under the Windows tab there's a gray box here. We're going to go ahead and copy down all of this text here. Now with this text copied, I'm going to go back to the virtual machine. Under the operations section, I'm going to click run command. Now I'm going to click run PowerShell script. Next I'm going to simply paste the text that I just copied and run it. After you verify that the script completed successfully, I'm going to paste in this script here and make sure to edit these variables here with what works with your environment. And go ahead and run that new script. After we verify that script successfully completed, let's traverse back over to the file share. Make sure to refresh. And we can see the new folder that we just created from that PowerShell script. And we can also see the text file that was also created. So an Azure File Share simply provides shared access to files. Azure File Shares support the industry standard SMB and NFS protocols, meaning you can seamlessly replace your on-premise file shares with Azure File Shares without worrying about application compatibility. Being able to share a file system across multiple machines, applications, or instances is a significant advantage with Azure Files for applications that need shareability. Lastly, let's configure network access for Azure Storage. Let's traverse back to our storage account. Under settings here, let's go to networking. And under firewalls and virtual networks, let's click selected networks. And then I'm going to click the checkbox add your client IP address. And then save that change. What this is going to do is block out all traffic towards this storage account or anything inside the storage account except for my IP address. So let's quickly go back to my Blob container. And grab the SAS URL. And in an in-private window, I should be able to grab the license. This is only done because my IP address is whitelisted for anything in this storage account. If I were to use this on any other machine, nothing would work. And that's the end of episode 10. If you followed this video, you have provisioned a lab environment for Azure Storage, created and configured Azure Storage accounts, managed Blob storage, managed authentication and authorization for that Blob storage, created and configured an Azure File Shares for that Blob storage, and then managed network access for Azure Storage. Wow, that's a lot of storage. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video or if it helped you even in the slightest, please like and maybe subscribe for future content. Additionally, if you have any suggestions or questions, please leave a comment down below and I'll be happy to help out any possible way I can. I'll see you guys in episode 11 where we will manage virtual machines. Peace!